The orchestra played its final notes as Stephen Colbert walked out onto his signature glossy stage, soaking in the applause. He raised his hands to quiet the cheering crowd and flashed a sly smile. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest tonight is someone who's made headlines for defending the former president, sparring with the media, and generally being on the opposite side of everything we say on this show. Please welcome Pam Bondi. The audience clapped, cautiously, almost theatrically. They were curious, but not welcoming. This was supposed to be an ambush, not a conversation. Pam walked in with crisp elegance, a navy blue suit that projected authority, and a demeanor that said, "I didn't come to play defense. I came to rewrite the playbook." She sat down, crossing one leg, and gave Stephen a professional nod. "Well, Pam," Colbert began with a faux gracious tone, "thank you for agreeing to sit down in the belly of the liberal beast." "I figured I'd bring a little oxygen," she said, smiling. "Looks like it's needed in here." Laughter, some surprised, some sharp. Colbert leaned in, smirking. "So, Pam, you've defended a lot of, let's call them unpopular people. Trump, mostly. Is there anyone you wouldn't defend? Say Voldemort? Thanos? The Joker?" The crowd laughed, awaiting the punchline. Pam didn't flinch. "I defend the Constitution," she replied, "even when comedians forget we have one." More laughter, this time split. Some laughed with her. Stephen blinked. He adjusted in his chair. "But surely you see the irony. I mean, you speak about law and order while defending someone who seems allergic to both." Pam leaned forward slightly. "No, Stephen, I see a double standard. When your side pushes false Russia stories for years, you call it journalism. When we question election integrity, you call it insurrection. That's not irony, that's selective outrage." A few groans came from the audience. Pam didn't even glance their way. Colbert chuckled. "Okay, so let's get into it. You've said things like media bias is dangerous, but don't you think calling journalists enemies of the people is a little fascist adjacent?" Pam's smile didn't fade. "I think it is dangerous when people who claim to report facts act like political activists. When you control the narrative and silence dissent, you are not protecting democracy. You're manipulating it." A ripple of applause, quieter than usual, but there. Stephen narrowed his eyes, changed direction. "You've accused the left of hypocrisy. But let's be honest, Pam. The GOP isn't exactly a monastery. I mean, you've seen the headlines, right?" She nodded. "Of course I have. The difference is we don't pretend we're saints. We don't use moral superiority to justify corruption. We own our flaws. Your side sells them as virtues." That one landed hard. Even Stephen leaned back slightly. "Wow, that was rehearsed." Pam raised an eyebrow. "No, Stephen, that was experienced." The crowd erupted, not all of them, but enough to change the tone in the room. Colbert looked down at his note cards. The jokes weren't landing like they used to. This wasn't the typical interview. This was a reckoning. And Pam Bondi had just rewritten the first act. The studio lights seemed a touch harsher now. Not on Pam, but on Stephen. The crowd wasn't turning against him, but they weren't laughing on cue either. He'd thrown sarcasm, wit, and smug asides. None had stuck. So now it was time to go straight for the political jugular. Colbert tapped his cue cards and leaned in. "All right, let's talk about January 6th, he said, his tone shifting from snarky to coldly serious. "You defended Trump while his supporters stormed the Capitol. You called it a media exaggeration. Do you still believe that?" The audience murmured, suddenly alert. Pam Bondi didn't blink. "What I believe," she said firmly, "is that violence is wrong, no matter who does it. But I also believe in consistency. The same people who called January 6th a coup spent all of 2020 ignoring riots that torched police stations, federal courthouses, and small businesses." Colbert tried to interrupt, but she kept going. "And here's what I didn't see during those BLM riots. Breathless CNN anchors, congressional hearings, or FBI raids on people's homes for simply attending a protest. If we're going to defend democracy, Stephen, we have to defend it from all extremes, not just the ones that fit your script." A brief silence, then applause, unexpectedly strong. Stephen smiled tightly. "But don't you think defending Trump, after everything, Damages your credibility. Pam tilted her head. What damages credibility is pretending to care about norms while cheering the weaponization of the DOJ. I defended Trump because he was treated like no president in history, spied on, smeared, and impeached for things his opponents do on weekends. Colbert raised an eyebrow. So you're just fine with his behavior? Pam leaned forward. I'm not defending his tweets, Stephen. I'm defending the truth. And if we start picking leaders based on who tweets nicely, we'll end up with a country run by PR interns instead of presidents. Some laughter broke out, surprised and unfiltered. Stephen chuckled, but the discomfort was real. He reached for his next card. Let's shift gears to something else you probably have a bold take on. Abortion. You're pro-life, very pro-life. How do you justify forcing your values on women across America? Pam didn't miss a beat. I don't force my values. I fight for the unborn who can't speak for themselves. The left talks about justice and equality, but draws the line at protecting life that's inconvenient. A few jeers from the crowd, but also a few claps. She continued, steady and unwavering. You want to talk about bodily autonomy? Let's talk about the baby's body. Let's talk about how abortion has become a sacrament in your culture. Not a last resort, but a badge of honor. I won't play along. Colbert raised his hands theatrically. You know, this would be the part of the interview where most guests smile nervously and backtrack. Pam folded her hands calmly. That's because most guests are trying to be liked. I'm trying to be honest. That line froze the room. Stephen leaned back. I have to say, you're tough. Pam shrugged. That's what happens when you've had to debate people who interrupt more and listen less. He smirked. Are you saying I interrupt? She smiled. I'm saying you talk a lot when facts make you uncomfortable. A thunderous reaction from the crowd. Stephen laughed, but it wasn't his usual victorious laugh. It was the kind you make when you know the conversation just slipped out of your control. Pam sat back, composed, as if the desk, the studio, and the crowd now all belonged to her. And in that moment, it was hard to argue otherwise. As the show's theme music faded into applause, Stephen Colbert smiled for the cameras. The audience clapped, louder than expected, but not entirely in his favor. The usual smug assurance in the room had fractured. Something had happened that didn't fit the script. Pam Bondi stood, shook Stephen's hand, and walked off stage with calm authority, not a bead of sweat on her brow. Her posture was untouched by conflict. She had entered the lion's den and left without a single scratch. Backstage, a junior producer whispered to her supervisor, "Did we just lose control of our own show?" The reply came dryly. She didn't argue. She neutralized. Meanwhile, in the dressing room, Colbert was unusually quiet. He sat alone for a moment, loosening his tie, staring at the monitor showing replay highlights. Most guests are trying to be liked. I'm trying to be honest. I defend the Constitution even when comedians forget we have one. You moved the goalposts. I held the line. He replayed those lines, each one more surgical than the last. A staffer entered. Social media is exploding, she said, tablet in hand. You're trending, but not the way we expected.